most of the time when I get on the phone with these business owners or these executives of healthcare groups, they all pretty much say the exact same thing. We thought we were protected. We thought we were doing the right thing. We were assured by our IT group that we were protected.
Welcome to Healthcare100. My name is Amal Nirgodkar. I'm the CEO of Patient Prism, and I have here AJ Peak, who is my co-host on Healthcare100. And it really is the ultimate playbook for scaling in healthcare. Each week, we sit down with operators, investors, innovators behind the fastest growing DSOs, MSOs, and health tech platforms to really unpack strategies, systems, capital structures that are driving real growth. And we also ask our guests to give us one big idea. Sometimes we call it the $100,000 idea that allows them to tell us what can they do to make $100,000 more. In this case, maybe how to save them from losing $100,000 or even more, so that they can, this one big idea. With that in mind, I want to welcome Gary Salman, from CEO of co-founder of Black Talon Security. And we're going to talk about cybersecurity today. It's the biggest, it's all over the news. If it's not in the news, you're not reading the right news. And Gary and I have done podcasts together. Gary's firm, full disclosure, does all our Patient Prism's work, and they keep us safe, and they've kept us safe for several years now, and we're very thankful for what they have done for us. So with that in mind, AJ, you want to kick off kind of the first question?
Gary, could you, first of all, maybe just give us a little bit of a background for our listeners that might be new to you and Black Talon, and then maybe just introduce maybe the top three kind of big, frightening things that CEOs are calling you, whether, to help and resolve, that we should really maybe dive into and unpack here for the remainder of the call.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate you guys. So background, I've been in the healthcare space for 33 years, all on the tech side, from building practice management and EMR and imaging systems all the way into deploying one of the very first cloud technologies in the late 90s. Our prior company, we built a pretty sizable cloud infrastructure before it was even called cloud. It's server-based computing back then. So I'm going to date myself, but late 90s, right? And that was kind of my first real introduction into cybersecurity, where I said to one of my engineers, I was like, dude, how many patient records do we have in the system now? He's like, let me check. And he came back. He's like, listen, we got about 3 million records. I was like, whoa, we got to really dig deep and figure out how we secure these systems. And ransomware didn't even exist back then, but servers were getting hacked. So that was really my first entry into cyber and the realization that this is real. And from that point forward, I've kind of been obsessed with security, trying to, keep the bad guys out and keep the good guys functional and protecting their business and operations. And for a lot of smaller groups, their livelihood, right? We've seen the downside of cyber events and the impact it has. So at Black Talon, we secure about 2,000 healthcare entities across the globe. We also secure lots of other types of businesses outside of healthcare, manufacturing, financials, banks, cities, things like that. So we have a wide scope in terms of our knowledge base. And one of the things that I think is really interesting in terms of what we do is we get hired by law firms and insurance carriers to deal with unfortunate events. Their clients get hit with ransomware or some type of cyber event, and our forensics team goes in and helps them, recover from those types of events, helps them deal with forensics and, legal and other types of things that negatively impact their business. So try and prevent, further damage to the organization. So yeah, I mean, I'm busy all the time. It's every day I wake up like, all right, what's today going to bring us? So, I definitely have the pleasure of dealing with a lot of really good stuff. I love helping businesses protect themselves, right? I don't like to see the bad part of it.
What are some of the kind of bigger concerns you're seeing now, or and you're getting phone calls to resolve that's happening, whether you're kind of large or small in the healthcare space?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple really big issues right now. One is what's called email account takeover. I think everyone in the business world has been exposed to this, either directly or indirectly. An email account takeover occurs when typically a user gives up their username and password to their Google Workspace or their Microsoft 365 account, and then a hacker takes over their account and spews out hundreds or tens of thousands of emails internally, right? So we've seen DSOs where someone in the C-suite has their account taken over, and all of a sudden they dump 5,000 emails emails to all of their employees asking them to do something. That can also go external. And the second those types of emails go external, meaning the hacker has access to, say, the CEO's email account, and those emails go external, you can imagine the damage that's done to other entities, because they're like, oh, look, the CEO, she's emailing me. She wants me to do something. I'm going to do that. Or here's a request for services, and a whole bunch of vendors like, oh, the CEO of this DSO or medical group is emailing me. I better open this link and do something. And then their systems get hit. So these things spiral out of control very quickly, especially the DSOs that are owned by private equity, or even privately owned ones. There's a lot of really confidential information in those executives' email systems. And when those things when those accounts get compromised and the hackers start reading what's going on, they will attack those other individuals. They will set up, some type of communication regarding maybe an event, right? They're an acquisition. They may all of a sudden change the wiring instructions, for, the closing or the acquisition. So, I think there's tremendous problems around that. And actually, I see way more email compromises nowadays than I see ransomware. And sometimes I even say to my colleagues, I'm like, you know what? Sometimes ransomware is better than these account takeovers, because now they're impacting external organizations as well. There is some amazing technology out there that leverages AI. So it's email security. Think of it as kind of like antivirus for your computers, but the AI actually reads the email. It looks at the links, looks at the attachments, looks at, behaviors of that email, then instantly determines, is this safe or is it not? And then it can literally rip that email out of the recipient's inbox. And it can also detect if the account's been taken over. So if someone gets your credentials, the technology is usually pretty good at determining that account was compromised. So, that's a huge problem right now. It's not uncommon. We're taking multiple phone calls per day from victims of these types of events. So you definitely want to leverage some AI-based email security. I think there's some legacy platforms out there that I see a lot of DSOs using that unfortunately is just not getting the job done. What I tell everyone is, if you're not fighting AI with AI, you're going to lose. That's just the bottom line. It's moving too fast. Like humans, like my network defenders, have to leverage AI to detect these attacks. Otherwise, the traditional methods of like regular antivirus detecting them, the event's done by the time those tools are triggering. So second, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Yeah, second, email takeover is the one, number one.
Yeah, I would say email takeover. Ransomware is still extremely prevalent. I think the big challenge that we're seeing, and we've been talking about this for years now, but it's mainstream. It's the theft of the confidential data within that healthcare entity's environment. It's easy to say, I'm never going to pay the hackers, right? I have backups, right? I have all this technology that's going to protect me. But when the hackers get in to your network and they siphon off some or all of your patient data, almost every healthcare victim actually pays the ransom demand, which even for smaller entities could be high 6 to 7 figures. And it's a huge problem. The challenge here is, if you don't pay the ransom, there's a couple things that can occur. One, you may not be able to get your network back because all the computers are encrypted or locked, and you need the keys from the hacker to unlock those computers. All the data is locked. The second is that theft of data that I just talked about. If you don't pay them, they're not like, oh, ABC Healthcare Group's not paying me, I'll just find another victim. No, they're going to take that data and they're going to auction it off for future attacks, right? Because they're going to monetize their investment. Unfortunately, it's a business to them. So next thing you're going to know is you're going to start finding out that, your patient data has been leaked on the dark web and your patients are being directly targeted, which is never a good situation. I will tell you that typically within 24 to 72 hours of a healthcare entity being attacked, there are multiple sensors across the internet that are picking up the fact that those entities have been hit. And often government agencies will show up, security, we've detected an attack against your organization, and this is what we know. And a lot of times healthcare workers are like, oh, this can't be real. This can't be real. This doesn't happen. I'm telling you, it happens all the time. So you can't hide from this anymore. You can't pretend, oh, everything will be fine. I'll just restore from a backup, because there are going to be multiple agencies that know. And then I'll say, kind of piggybacking on this, AJ, the third thing is class actions. For those of you who are in the DSO space, I'll say about 4 weeks ago, a medium-sized DSO was hit. And within within a couple days of the sensors picking up the attack, they were served with a class action lawsuit from attorneys. So that they're literally, in probably one of the worst situations they've ever been in, where computers are locked down and they can't treat patients. The next thing they know, they have someone serving them a lawsuit. I will tell you definitively that regardless of your size, right, the industry you're in, meaning healthcare, versus non-healthcare, most of the time, well, I'll say close to 100% of the time in healthcare, you will be served with a class action lawsuit, period. It's not right, and I'm not defending those actions. That's the world we're in. So you brought up a good point. Like, as a CEO or an executive of a healthcare group, what do I need to be worried about? That, and unfortunately, what I see often is these insurance policies for cyber, they're maxed out by the time the event's over. They've had to pay for all of the business interruption and ransom payments and attorneys and forensics. And the next thing you know is you're just served with an $8 million class action lawsuit and you have no insurance policy left. And that's tough. I saw something at a smaller scale with a 3-location dental group up in the northwest of the country, and they got hit with a ransomware attack. It was a train wreck for the organization. They maxed out their insurance policy, and now the organization is going out of business, the practice. They can't afford the class action suits. So not a scare tactic, right? This is all real stuff that you have to be prepared for.
There's like so much I want to unpack here. So can you back up the FBI showing up at the door? Like, this really happens? Like, they'll not, like, walk me through what you do when this happens. Like, when I was previously running, my DSO, if I got a call that the FBI is at our doors, like, I would say this is a joke, right? This is a scam. What do you do? And if we were to call you, like, how does it like unravel?
So I agree with you, AJ. The first time I saw this was about 2 years ago, where a orthodontic practice got our name and called us. They're like, hey, I got your name from the AO. And we just had some FBI agents at our office telling us our data was on the dark web. And I said the exact same thing. I'm like, I've never heard of that before. Can you give me their names? And I have a lot of contacts. So I made a phone call and I confirmed, yeah, look, that was real, right? So typically the way this goes down is they are monitoring the criminals and they see the data on their dark web websites. Like, some of this stuff is now publicly available, right? It's not only restricted to law enforcement. So they'll see abcdentalgroup.com listed on a dark web site for a specific hacking group, right? So all of these hacking groups, there's a little over 300 of them. They all have kind of their own brand, their colors, their logos. Think of them as like a cartel, right? That's probably the best way to describe it. And then they have their dark web websites. So their website is called an onion site. So it's .onion instead of like .com or .net, and you have to typically use like the Tor browser, Onion browser, to get into the Tor network Onion browser to get into it. And then when you open it up, often they'll have all of the victims listed, so you can go in there and be like, oh, this group got hit, right? When they'll tell you when they hit them. They'll often pull historical data off the internet about that victim, and they'll often list or show the files that they've taken. So it is real. If you're not really sure, to answer your question, that they're actually agents, you can typically call your local FBI field office and just confirm, hey, I am, ABC Group. I have 2 people indicating that they're FBI here. Is there any way that I can confirm that they're from your field office? And typically they will provide that information. So
what do you do? So now that they're real, I call you, like, what can we do now that happened?
yeah, so look, you got to take this stuff seriously. The very first thing I would do is open a claim with my insurance carrier, put them on notice. Hey, this is what happened. I may need to be, opening a claim with you. Get your IT vendor, either internal or external IT or managed service provider, on an emergency phone call and explain this is what happened. And they may say something like, oh, well, our antivirus, triggered an alert 2 weeks ago. Maybe this is related. And then it's okay, I think we have a real problem here. Or they may claim they know nothing about it because their tools aren't capable of detecting an attack, which we're seeing more and more frequently, right? The pull here in case of a fire alarm is not happening for a lot of these managed service providers because their tools and their techniques aren't sophisticated enough to detect these threat actors. So that's where I would start, sometimes the FBI can give you more relevant information, and they can actually show you potentially some of the data that is taken. They probably have proof. They're not just showing up to show up. So I would take that approach. Sometimes the bureau is going to guide you in terms of what should happen next. So I think there's so many different variables here, but it's immediate. Get in contact with the right people. If you don't have an incident response company available, reach out to a company like ours to start with, and get your claim going. So at least you have some initial guidance. And it could also be very evident, right? There could be bad things happening on computers. All of a sudden your user's like, oh well, I noticed the server was down an hour ago. I thought maybe that IT was working on it. So what we often see, AJ, is there's always little smoke, right? There were these little indicators on the network for days or weeks that something was wrong, but no one connected the dots.
So, I mean, it's going to become easier and easier. If somebody impersonates and gets a hold of your email, you can connect that to Claude. And then it's not even effort. In the past, there used to be effort to figure out. All I have to tell Claude is like, hey, look through all my emails, find out all the routing account numbers that you can find. And now what used to take weeks now takes 30 minutes. So now the hackers have these large language models as tools. We saw the whole Claude mythos where they said it's too scary to release because it can wreak havoc. And now the hackers have gotten hold of it somehow. But we're going to see on a giant scale the hacking, because obviously people are not, these models are going to be so efficient that a C-grade hacker is going to become an A-grade hacker. And so now people like you guys have to be even smarter in making sure that this is there. I mean, there's no choice. I mean, the hacking community is going to expand significantly because it becomes now easier. Just like you can do PowerPoints on Claude now, you can just hack on Claude.
Yeah, you don't need to be a graphic artist anymore, right? You don't need to. Yeah, you can have someone else analyze your financial statements. So I'm all like, you're spot on. This is our biggest fear, right? When they came out, Mythos came out with this warning, like we went, emergency stop internal, like, hey, all C-suite, meet up. We got to figure out what this really means. But look, I think they also realize that if they release this technology, it's bad. But understand that these malicious LLMs already exist, right? They're being managed by threat groups that don't have the name, like the one you mentioned, right? So ChatGPT is trying really hard to, not produce malicious code. But the reality is this, Anthropic, all these orgs know that when they give their technology the ability to generate code, when they give them the ability to look for vulnerabilities, that's the problem with Mythos, right? They said, oh, well, our technology can look at basically any application and find a security problem with it. Look, that was pretty much a year ago. That was pretty much all done by hand. Literally a hacker trying to look through code and figure out, hey, how can I write something to exploit this code, that original good guy developer didn't anticipate. So now you can run these LLMs against it and within minutes, potentially find a vulnerability. So look, this is a serious problem. Like if they don't figure it out and the government doesn't figure it out, I'd rather they figure it out. There will be probably an unlimited number of events occurring, across the globe in every single industry. So not to be an alarmist, but this is something that everyone's taking seriously. And look, what I always say is there's a lot of really good, smart people on our side too that are building technology to anticipate this type of technology. So this isn't like doom and gloom. We're all over and sell off our stock portfolios now. But it is something to consider. And I think the biggest challenge that I see is a lot of these DSOs and medical groups are still running security the same way they did, 2, 3, 4 years ago. And it's not going to work.
Norton antivirus.
Yeah. It's
McAfee, yeah.
Yeah, it's like 35 millimeter film. I mean, these things are becoming so antiquated, and because they've worked in the past and because you're working with a trusted vendor, you're like, oh, we'll be fine. Everything will be okay. And this all falls in the lap of the executives, right? The C-suite. In the end, when there's a cyber event, the director of IT is not owning it. The managed service provider is not owning it. The executive team and the board owns it. And I think that's really, really important to understand.
You bring up a slightly frightening point as I Rolodex on my previous business that I started. So for the typical multi-site group that calls you for ransom or email takeover, how many of them actually have what they thought was pretty good IT support, or is it often they're just completely clueless, head in the sand? Like, paint us through what's the typical issues that those groups have, or did they actually work with somebody and they thought they were okay and they really weren't?
So I think for most groups, let's say the group's over 5 locations, right? 5 to hundreds. Most of them have, on the smaller side, they're going to have some external IT help, right? Some IT company that's supporting them, locally, regionally, or throughout the country. And often there's trust put in those individuals. And what happens is the executive team doesn't know what questions to ask of those individuals. Like, we can get into a little bit more detail. So they don't know what to ask. The big problem that I see, regardless of the size of group, is you can't have your IT resources also validating their own security, right? They built the own security, and they're going to test it in a way that they think is correct, and that doesn't work. Like, self-auditing in this world is the biggest mistake these organizations are making. And to your point, AJ, most of the time when I get on the phone with these business owners or these executives of healthcare groups, they all pretty much say the exact same thing. We thought we were protected. We thought we were doing the right thing. We were assured by our IT group that we were protected. And I see the number one problem being two problems. One is the self-auditing. And here's a good gut check, right? If you're an executive listening to this right now, I want you to think through this statement. Have you ever sat down with your IT resources and said, hey, show me every single security vulnerability in our environment? Or has anyone ever proactively done that with you? And the challenge here is, I'll say 90% of healthcare orgs, small to medium size, have never gone through this process. No one's ever pushed a piece of paper in front of the executive team and say, hey guys, here's the network we built for you, and here are all of the security problems with the network we built. It just doesn't happen. I've lectured to tens of thousands of people live, and I always ask this question at a show of hands. And in the last 8 years, I probably had half a dozen hands raised. So there is no visibility into it. So I think that's definitely a challenge. So I'd say that's what I see most often, is they had no visibility. They didn't know what questions to ask, and they say, well, yeah, look, I thought we were good, or they thought they asked the right questions. So it is a challenge for sure.
It is so hard to know what you don't know. And how do I know? I'm like, Gary, you are in this business for a long time. Like, how do you even pick? Because the problem with humans is that the moment they meet another human that knows a little bit about something more than them, they automatically believe in them, right? And then you got somebody at your church or whatever it is, and like, oh, I'll take care of your security. And you're hiring people based on likability and not competence a lot. Like, what's the rubric when you're trying to choose? I'm the CEO of a small group, medium group, whatever group that is, right? The larger groups probably have better advisors, consultants, but even mid-market, and I'm trying to choose an appropriate vendor for handling this. What do you even ask? Like, I don't even know what questions to ask, and I've used you for 2 years. Well, I know you guys are great because we've got a cybersecurity expert in-house, so we've got external auditor, we have a whole bunch of teams, right? But when I started, I had no idea. I had no idea what to even ask, besides the fact that the assessment's there, right?
Yeah, look, there's the check the box stuff, right? If you're in healthcare, a HIPAA risk assessment, right? That checks some boxes. But to your point, you're 100% right. They don't have a chief information security officer as part of their C-suite. They may have a CTO that's relatively knowledgeable about technology, but isn't fully schooled up on cybersecurity. Two very different things. Look, I think the best example I can give in the medical space is a cardiologist versus a cardiothoracic surgeon, right? A lot of times people are like, oh, isn't that kind of like the same thing? They both work on the heart. And in the dental space, like a GP and an oral surgeon, GP is not doing orthognathic surgery, and an oral surgeon's not putting veneers on, right? Two totally different, specialties. And I think what happens here, Amal, is in the tech space, the IT space, the assumption that leadership teams make is, well, because they know computers and they built my server and they keep me functional, they obviously know cybersecurity. It absolutely does not work that way. It's a totally different mindset. It's a totally different level of training and different tools, like to kind of put that into perspective. And then I'll answer your question on, like, what do I need to ask? What I see most internal and external IT teams focusing on is reaction, right? Some red light shows up on a tool, and now I have to react to that, meaning someone's already in my building going to do something bad. What cyber companies do is they say, I never want my red light to go off. Like, I want to figure out how to find the holes in my network, the misconfigurations, the unpatched software. I want to patch those things so the hackers don't get through my doors and windows. Very, very different mindset. And I think this is so critical because when you look at a lot of these cyber attacks, one of the things we always say is, oh man, this thing was totally preventable, right? It's unfortunate, but it was preventable if they had only done this. And I think that's what's disheartening a lot of times is you feel so bad for these victims because you know, in your heart, this could have been stopped, or minimized. But to your point, like what are the questions that, an executive really needs to be thinking about and asking? And I always say you don't need to be technical to understand cyber per se. You just need to know what questions to ask. And the first thing and I'll say it again, and this is not just because I'm in cybersecurity, but when you talk to a lot of the law firms who specialize in data privacy and are also breach counsel, a lot of them are now saying separate cyber from IT, two different organizations, right? So you have those true checks and balances. Don't have it all in one shop. So what are the things you need to be doing to help maintain security? One is looking for the weaknesses in what's called your outer perimeter. I think this is very simple. This is how are your computers connected to the internet? And for most people, it's a modem. And then for people who are running businesses or organizations, there's a firewall, right? And the challenge with your outer perimeter is those firewalls have to be configured. They have to be tested daily to make sure they're not misconfigured or missing a patch. And the way to do that is literally launch cyber attacks by good guys against them every single day, just like we do for your organization. Because what's not a vulnerability today is a vulnerability tomorrow. And to your point, AI is making that real.
Yeah.
So that's step one. Step two is you need to know what's going on inside your network. So think about laptops and desktops and Wi-Fi devices, things like that. So the way hackers breach those devices as well are through vulnerabilities, right? You could have an unpatched piece of Microsoft software or Adobe or Google. I mean, hundreds of different applications that hackers can launch attacks against. And the software is like, come on in. I don't even need a username and password, right? Because the hacker is using a toolkit against it to gain access to it. They kind of like pick the lock on it. So, right, cyber companies provide technology that can look at all of your software and hardware every 4 hours